Looking at the challenges Ontario faces with economic shifts, housing crises, and demographic changes, some cities are struggling more than others. Here are 10 Ontario cities that might not make it to 2030 as we know them today. Number 10. Elliott Lake. Once known as Canada's uranium capital, Elliott Lake now faces a grim reality that most residents don't want to admit. This northern Ontario city built its entire identity around mining, and when the uranium boom ended, so did the city's future. Here's something that might shock you. Elliott Lake has one of the oldest populations in all of Canada, with over 30% of residents being seniors. While that might sound peaceful, it creates an economic death spiral that's almost impossible to escape. Young people leave for opportunities elsewhere. Businesses close because there aren't enough customers, and the tax base shrinks every year. The city tried to reinvent itself as a retirement community, but even that strategy is failing. The infrastructure is crumbling, healthcare services are stretched thin, and there simply aren't enough working-age people to support the growing senior population. When your biggest employer becomes the local hospital and most of your residents are on fixed incomes, you're not building a sustainable economy. You're managing decline. What makes this even more heartbreaking is that many seniors who moved here for affordable retirement living are now trapped. Their homes have lost value and they can't afford to move elsewhere even if they wanted to. The question isn't whether Elliott Lake will change by 2030, it's whether there will be anyone left to turn off the lights. But Elliott Lake isn't the only northern Ontario city facing this crisis. Number 9. Kapuskasing. Kapuskasing represents everything that's wrong with Ontario's resource-dependent communities, and most people have never even heard of it. This paper mill town in northeastern Ontario has been hemorrhaging population for decades, but the real crisis is just beginning. The Kapuskasing mill, which employed hundreds of workers and supported thousands of indirect jobs, has been on life support for years. Paper mills across North America are closing as digital technology eliminates demand for newsprint and other paper products. When, not if, this mill finally closes permanently, Kapuskasing will lose its economic foundation overnight. Here's what's really terrifying about Kapuskasing's situation. The city has no backup plan. Unlike larger centers that can diversify their economies, small northern towns like Kapuskasing are completely dependent on single industries. When that industry dies, the entire community collapses within a few years. The warning signs are everywhere. School enrollment has dropped so dramatically that they're considering closing elementary schools. The hospital has reduced services multiple times. Local businesses are boarding up their windows because there aren't enough customers to stay profitable. Even the Tim Hortons, yes, the Tim Hortons, has reduced its hours because there isn't enough foot traffic. Young families are making the smart choice and leaving while they still can. But for older residents who've lived here their entire lives, watching their community slowly die is like watching a family member suffer from a terminal illness. You know how this story ends, but you're powerless to stop it. And speaking of powerless communities, let's talk about a city that's facing an even more immediate crisis. Number 8. Kenora. Kenora sits on the beautiful Lake of the Woods, and that scenic location is both its greatest asset and its biggest problem. This northwestern Ontario city is caught in a perfect storm of economic challenges that could transform it beyond recognition by 2030. The city's traditional industries, forestry, mining, and commercial fishing, have all declined dramatically. But unlike other resource towns, Kenora can't simply shut down and disappear because it's also a regional service center for dozens of smaller communities. This creates a unique trap. They have all the expenses of providing regional services but without the tax base to support them. Here's where things get really complicated. Kenora is also dealing with serious social challenges that most other Ontario cities don't face. The proximity to multiple First Nations communities has created complex jurisdictional issues around healthcare, education, and social services. The city often ends up providing services to people who don't pay municipal taxes, creating an unsustainable financial burden. The housing crisis in Kenora might be the worst in Ontario that nobody talks about. Because the city is isolated, it's over 200 kilometers to the next significant town, there's nowhere for overflow population to go. People are living in conditions that would shock residents of Toronto or Ottawa. But because Kenora is out of sight, it's out of mind for provincial policymakers. Tourism provides some economic activity during the summer months, but seasonal employment can't support a year-round community. Local businesses struggle to find workers during tourist season and struggle to stay open during the long winter months when visitors disappear. The city is essentially becoming a tale of two communities: wealthy cottage owners who visit for a few months each year, and year-round residents who are increasingly struggling to make ends meet. By 2030, Kenora might still exist on maps, but it could be unrecognizable to people who knew it just a decade earlier. But at least Kenora has tourism. Our next city doesn't even have that advantage. Number 7, Timmins. Timmins calls itself the city with a heart of gold, but that gold mining heritage might not be enough to save it from economic cardiac arrest by 2030. This northeastern Ontario city faces challenges that would overwhelm much larger communities. The mining industry that built Timmins is experiencing a fundamental shift that most residents don't fully understand. Modern mining operations require far fewer workers than the old deep shaft mines that employed thousands of people. Even when new mines open, they create hundreds of jobs, not thousands. Meanwhile, the skilled workers these new operations need often come from other cities and live in temporary accommodations rather than putting down roots in Timmins. Here's a shocking fact that reveals the depth of Timmins' problems. The city covers an area larger than Prince Edward Island, but has a population of less than 42,000 people. This creates massive infrastructure challenges that smaller, more compact communities don't face. Maintaining roads, water systems, and emergency services across such a vast area with such a small tax base is financially impossible. The demographic trends in Timmins are particularly alarming. The city has one of the highest rates of young adult out-migration in Ontario. University graduates leave and never come back. Skilled tradespeople move to larger centers where they can earn higher wages. Even healthcare professionals struggle to build sustainable practices because the population base is too small and spread out. What's happening in Timmins is a preview of what could happen to mining communities across northern Ontario. The industry is consolidating, automating, and centralizing operations in fewer locations. Cities that don't adapt quickly enough will find themselves competing for a shrinking number of jobs and a declining population. The city has tried to diversify its economy, but the challenges are enormous. It's difficult to attract new businesses to a community that's hours away from major markets and struggling with population decline. By 2030, Timmins might still be on the map, but it could be a very different place than the bustling mining town it once was. And if you think Timmins has problems, wait until you hear about our next city. Number 6, North Bay. North Bay was supposed to be different. As a regional center with a university, a college, and multiple military installations, it seemed positioned to weather the economic storms that devastated smaller northern Ontario communities. But appearances can be deceiving. The city's problems started with the closure of the Canadian Forces Base North Bay's major operations. While some military presence remains, the massive job losses from defense cutbacks created economic shockwaves that the community is still trying to absorb. When you lose hundreds of well-paying government jobs in a city of 50,000 people, the impact ripples through every sector of the local economy. Nipissing University, which was supposed to anchor North Bay's economy, is itself struggling with declining enrollment and budget pressures. The university has had to cut programs and reduce staff, exactly the opposite of what a community needs when it's trying to retain young people and attract new residents. Here's what makes North Bay's situation particularly frustrating. The city has all the infrastructure and amenities needed to succeed, but it's slowly losing population anyway. They have a regional airport, they're connected to major highways, they have educational institutions and healthcare facilities. On paper, North Bay should be thriving. In reality, it's slowly declining. The problem is location and perception. North Bay is far enough north to face the challenges of Northern Ontario communities, but not far enough south to benefit from the economic growth in the Greater Toronto Area. It's caught in an economic no-man's land where it's too isolated to attract major employers, but not remote enough to benefit from resource extraction industries. Young people graduate from high school in North Bay, go away to university or college, and never come back. The city is aging rapidly and the tax base is shrinking. Local businesses struggle to find workers, but there aren't enough good jobs to keep young people in the community. By 2030, North Bay might still function as a regional service center, but it could be a much smaller, much older community than it is today. The infrastructure that once supported 70,000 people might be serving a population of 40,000 or less. But even North Bay's challenges pale in comparison to what's happening in our next city. Number 5. Sault Ste. Marie. Sault Ste. Marie represents one of the most dramatic urban decline stories in Ontario, and most of the province doesn't even realize it's happening. This border city has lost over 20% of its population since the 1980s, and the decline is accelerating. The closure of major employers like the steel plant and various manufacturing facilities created an economic crater that the city has never recovered from. But what makes Sault Ste. Marie's situation unique is how the decline has become self-reinforcing. As population drops, businesses close. As businesses close, more people leave. As more people leave, property values fall and the tax base shrinks. It's an economic death spiral that's incredibly difficult to escape. Here's a statistic that should terrify anyone who cares about this community. Sault Ste. Marie has some of the cheapest housing in Ontario, and houses still sit empty for months or years before selling. When you can't give away real estate in a province facing a housing crisis, you know something is fundamentally broken. The city's location, which was once an advantage, has become a liability. Being on the border with Michigan doesn't help when both sides of the border are experiencing economic decline. The American side of Sault Ste. Marie is facing similar challenges, so there's no cross-border economic synergy to build on. What's particularly heartbreaking about Sault Ste. Marie is that it's a beautiful city with incredible natural assets. Algoma University provides some economic stability, and the tourism potential is enormous. But you can't build a sustainable economy on seasonal tourism and a small university when your major employers have disappeared. The city has tried everything: economic development incentives, rebranding campaigns, infrastructure investments, but nothing has stopped the population decline. Young people leave for opportunities in Toronto, Ottawa, or Western Canada. Retirees move to warmer climates or closer to their children who have already left the city. By 2030, Sault Ste. Marie could be a city of less than 60,000 people trying to maintain infrastructure that was built for 100,000. That's not a recipe for municipal success. It's a blueprint for municipal bankruptcy. And speaking of municipal financial crisis, our next city is facing even worse challenges. Number 4. Sudbury. This might surprise you, but Sudbury, the largest city in Northern Ontario, is facing an existential crisis that could fundamentally transform it by 2030. Despite recent economic diversification efforts, the city remains dangerously dependent on the volatile mining industry. Vail and Glencore, the two major mining companies operating in Sudbury, have been cutting jobs and consolidating operations for years. Modern mining technology requires fewer workers, and global commodity prices make some operations uneconomical. When these companies sneeze, Sudbury catches pneumonia. Here's what most people don't realize about Sudbury's economy. Despite all the talk about diversification, the city is still fundamentally a mining town. The university, the hospital, the service sector, they all depend on the economic activity generated by mining. When mining employment drops, everything else follows. The city has invested heavily in trying to attract new industries, particularly in technology and healthcare. But competing for technology companies when you're hundreds of kilometers from major markets and dealing with harsh winters is incredibly difficult. Most tech companies want to locate in places where they can easily recruit talent and access customers. not in isolated northern cities. Sudbury's demographic trends are particularly concerning. Like other northern Ontario cities, it's losing young people to Toronto, Ottawa, and other major centers. But unlike smaller communities, Sudbury is large enough that this population loss creates visible urban decay. Empty storefronts downtown, declining school enrollment, and aging infrastructure tell the story of a city struggling to maintain itself. The healthcare system in Sudbury is under enormous pressure because it serves not just the city but dozens of smaller communities across northeastern Ontario. As those smaller communities lose population, Sudbury has to provide more services to fewer taxpayers spread across a larger area. Climate change is adding another layer of complexity. The extreme weather events that are becoming more common in northern Ontario are expensive to deal with, and they make the region less attractive to potential residents and businesses. By 2030, Sudbury might still be the largest city in northern Ontario, but it could be a much smaller, much different place than it is today. The question is whether it can diversify its economy quickly enough to avoid the fate of other resource-dependent communities. But Sudbury's challenges look manageable compared to what's happening in our next city. Number 3. Windsor. Windsor's inclusion on this list might shock you because it's still a city of over 200,000 people. But size doesn't protect you from economic forces that can transform a community beyond recognition. And Windsor is facing multiple crises simultaneously. The automotive industry that built Windsor has been in decline for decades. Plant closures, job losses, and the shift toward electric vehicles are creating fundamental changes that the city is struggling to adapt to. Even when automotive plants remain open, they employ far fewer people than they did in the past due to automation and efficiency improvements. Here's the uncomfortable truth about Windsor. The city has become dangerously dependent on cross-border workers who live in Windsor but work in Detroit. When the American economy struggles, Windsor suffers. When border security tightens, Windsor suffers. When the Canadian dollar strengthens, Windsor suffers. The city has little control over the economic forces that determine its fate. The demographic changes in Windsor are particularly troubling. The city is attracting new immigrants, which should be positive, but many of these newcomers use Windsor as a stepping stone to other parts of Canada. They stay long enough to meet residency requirements, and then move to Toronto, Vancouver, or other major centers where there are more economic opportunities. Downtown Windsor has become a symbol of urban decline. Empty buildings, struggling retailers, and a general sense of economic malaise create a negative feedback loop that makes it harder to attract the investment needed for revitalization. The city's location on the border, which was once its greatest advantage, is becoming increasingly problematic. Cross-border shopping has declined, casino revenues are dropping, and the cost of maintaining border infrastructure continues to rise while the economic benefits decrease. Climate change is adding new challenges. Windsor is experiencing more extreme weather events, and the costs of dealing with flooding, storm damage, and infrastructure repairs are straining municipal budgets. By 2030, Windsor might still exist, but it could be a fundamentally different city. The question is whether it will be smaller and poorer, or whether it can somehow reinvent itself for a post-automotive economy. But Windsor's struggles are nothing compared to what's happening in our next city. Number 2. Thunder Bay. Thunder Bay should be a success story. It's the largest city in northwestern Ontario. It has a major university, and it sits at the head of Lake Superior with access to both rail and water transportation. Instead, it's become a case study in how even cities with apparent advantages can face existential threats. The city's economic foundation is crumbling. The pulp and paper mills that employed thousands of people have closed or dramatically reduced operations. The grain elevators that once made Thunder Bay one of Canada's most important ports handle a fraction of their former volume. Even the railroad, which was supposed to provide permanent economic stability, has cut jobs and reduced operations. Here's a statistic that reveals the depth of Thunder Bay's problems. The city has one of the highest crime rates in Canada, including a murder rate that would shock residents of much larger cities. This isn't just a social problem, it's an economic development disaster. Try convincing a company to relocate to a city that regularly appears on lists of Canada's most dangerous places. The social problems in Thunder Bay are complex and interconnected with its economic decline. High rates of addiction, homelessness, and mental health issues create challenges that overwhelm municipal resources. The city spends enormous amounts on social services and police, money that could otherwise be invested in economic development. Lakehead University provides some economic stability, but enrollment has been declining, and the university faces the same budget pressures as institutions across Ontario. A struggling university in a struggling city creates a downward spiral that's difficult to escape. The city's infrastructure is aging and expensive to maintain. The water system, roads, and public buildings were built for a larger, more prosperous population. As the tax base shrinks, maintaining this infrastructure becomes increasingly difficult. Perhaps most troubling, Thunder Bay is losing its role as a regional center. Improved transportation and communication technology means that smaller communities in northwestern Ontario can access services directly from. By 2030, Thunder Bay could be a city in serious decline, struggling to maintain basic services while dealing with growing social problems and a shrinking economy. The transformation might not be immediate, but the trajectory is clear. And now, the city facing the most immediate threat. Number 1. Oshawa. Oshawa's inclusion at number 1 might surprise you because it's part of the Greater Toronto Area and has a population of over 160,000 people. But that's exactly why its potential transformation by 2030 is so significant. When a major GTA city faces existential threats, the implications reach far beyond municipal boundaries. General Motors' announcement that it would close its Oshawa assembly plant was supposed to be reversed, but the reality is that automotive manufacturing in Oshawa will never be what it once was. The city built its entire identity around being Motor City Canada, and that identity is disappearing whether local politicians want to admit it or not. Here's what makes Oshawa's situation uniquely dangerous. The city has some of the highest municipal debt levels in Ontario, accumulated during the good times when automotive jobs provided a strong tax base. Now that tax base is eroding, but the debt payments continue. It's like losing your job but still having to pay your mortgage. Something has to give. The housing market in Oshawa reveals the depth of the economic uncertainty. Despite being in the GTA, where housing prices have exploded, Oshawa's real estate market is much more volatile. People are uncertain about the city's economic future, and that uncertainty is reflected in property values and development patterns. The social problems that come with rapid economic change are becoming visible throughout Oshawa. Increased homelessness, addiction issues, and crime are straining municipal resources just when the city can least afford additional expenses. What's particularly troubling is that Oshawa can't easily reinvent itself. Unlike smaller communities that can pivot to tourism or resource extraction, Oshawa is an industrial city without competitive advantages in other sectors. It's too far from downtown Toronto to become a bedroom community for financial services workers, but it's not far enough to escape the high costs associated with GTA living. The city is caught in a demographic transition that mirrors what's happening across industrial Ontario. Older workers who built their careers in automotive are staying put, but younger people are looking elsewhere for opportunities. The result is an aging population with increasing service needs and a shrinking workforce to support them. By 2030, Oshawa might still be on the map, but it could be a very different place. The question is whether it will manage a controlled transition to a post-automotive economy, or whether it will experience the kind of rapid decline that has devastated other industrial cities across North America. These 10 cities represent different aspects of the same fundamental challenge. How do communities adapt when the economic foundations that built them disappear? Some might surprise us and find new paths forward, but others face changes so fundamental that they might not survive in any recognizable form. What do you think about these cities? Have you seen similar changes in your own community? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and tell us which city you think faces the biggest challenges. If you found this analysis helpful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content about Ontario's changing economy. Click the bell icon to get notified when we release our next video exploring how communities across Canada are adapting to economic change.